Hi, are you just learning to speak English? If you are, why don't you follow along with me as I read to you from my book, Sarah Spoon Goes to the Moon. Sarah stood out in her school because of her size. There were teaspoons and coffee spoons and luncheon and dinner tablespoons, but no one in 2B was as big or as tall or as heavy as Sarah. Even the teacher, Miss Kuchara, who was an iced teaspoon, was smaller than Sarah. At Sarah's school, the children divided themselves into small groups. 2 or 3 of them played together, ate lunch at the same table. They walked home together or sat next to each other on the school bus. They sent notes to each other. They went to each other's houses after school. They slept out in the woods on the weekends. They told each other secrets on the playground. They talked on the telephone. Sometimes friends changed from one small group to another. Sometimes a group might have 2 spoons and on another day, 3. The only thing that never changed about any of the groups was that none of them ever included Sarah. Sarah's mother saw that her daughter was sad most of the time. Trying to cheer her up, she would take her to the supermarket to choose a book from the rack next to the checkout counter. The books Sarah liked best were the ones with numbers games. Sarah spent hours working on puzzles, adding and subtracting. She became very good at arithmetic. Her marks were the highest in 2B. Sometimes Miss Kuchara would ask her to write the numbers on the blackboard during a lesson. Even though she did really like to do puzzles, and she felt pretty good about getting the highest grades in her math class, Sarah still felt unhappy a lot of the time. In fact, there were moments when she could understand why it was that one of her sisters had run away with the dish. She thought a lot about that sister before she fell asleep at night. Maybe that was why, waking one morning in the middle of a dream, she said softly to herself, "Run away. Yes, I could do that." But even as she spoke, she was not sure she was brave enough to run away. Besides, she loved her mother and her father and her 2 grannies and her 2 grandpas, and although she wasn't certain she loved all of them, she'd probably miss her 10 sisters who still lived at home. Later that same morning, on her way to school, she passed the Moon Pizza Parlor. "That's it! I'll get a job. I can quit school and start working." Sarah walked in with a big smile and said she was looking for a job. "How old are you?" asked a fork wearing an apron. Now Sarah did not want to lie. She wasn't exactly certain how old you had to be to quit school and to start working, but she guessed it was a bit more than 7 years. She didn't know any second graders that had a job. Sarah paused. In a small voice, she said, "I'm finishing school." She suddenly felt better because at that moment she knew that the truth was she didn't want to go back to school anymore. It was dark inside the Moon Pizza Parlor. There was a lot of noise being made in the kitchen. "Okay, you can start today. Wait here and I'll show you how to work the cash register." Because Sarah was so big, the old fork wanted her to stand next to the cash register by the door. This was to stop people from running away without paying for their pizzas. The Moon was not a fancy restaurant. Because of all of the time that Sarah had spent doing puzzles, she was really good at adding up numbers. The old fork and his old wife, who owned the Moon Pizza Parlor, were both almost blind. They had trouble counting money. With Sarah spending her school hours at the pizza parlor, there were no more problems. Sarah always added up the bills and counted the change correctly. She never made any mistakes. Mr. and Mrs. Fork were very happy. They both told Sarah again and again how glad they were to have her working for them. At school, Sarah had felt sad and heavy. Now she felt wonderful. When people came to pay for their pizzas, they saw themselves reflected in a happily smiling Sarah, and that made them feel good. Because they liked how they felt, they would come back again and again to the Moon and would tell their friends how great it was. Those friends would tell other friends. The Moon became more and more popular and more crowded. It wasn't long before friends of Sarah's parents told them about the Moon. You can imagine how surprised they were when they went out to have a pizza for lunch and found their daughter Sarah working in the restaurant. At first, they were shocked. Then they were angry at Sarah. Next, they were furious with Mr. and Mrs. Fork. Mr. and Mrs. Fork were amazed to hear that Sarah should have been in second grade. They couldn't believe that she was so young and yet so good at counting. They talked about how hard she had worked and how much she had helped them. Listening to the two of them speak made Sarah's parents begin to appreciate just how good Sarah made everyone around her feel, and also how very happy she herself had become. After hearing what the Forks had to say, Sarah's parents weren't so upset. They felt proud of her, but they still wanted her to go back to school. Mr. and Mrs. Fork were sorry, but they saw that Sarah was too young to work in their restaurant. They offered her a job if she wanted one when she was older and invited her to come back whenever she liked for free pizza. Sarah's parents agreed to ask the school to let her skip up to a grade where the other kids would be more her size. They knew that she had learned so much by working that fourth grade would be easy for her. So, Sarah stopped working and went back to school. Sometimes she was in one group, sometimes in another, but she always had lots of friends, and she often visited the Forks, and they were always happy to see her. Read, read, read. Thanks for listening.